Survival mode. Understanding how stress is silently running your life and impacting your behavior. Welcome to this 3-part series inside the Movement, Mind, and Meaning podcast. I'm your host, Megan Nolan. We are going to be unpacking your stress response, i.e., you remember, fight or flight, rest and digest. It's evolved more than that, and we're going to talk about that too. But in this first episode, we're talking about fight mode. We're talking about when stress happens and you go into go mode, and the different patterns like perfectionism and control and being a high performer show up as survival strategies to handle the situation. We're going to unpack all of that. So let's back it up a little bit. Remember back in biology when you learned about your nervous system, right? We're going to do a little refresher, and perhaps this will be a little bit of a, ooh, wow, this is really cool, because we've come further in our understanding thanks to an incredible man named Dr. Stephen Porges, who recognized, based on research that he was doing with little babies who were in the NICU, different patterns of the nervous system that were not, until that point, known about. You probably remember rest and digest, right? Rest and digest is when we heal and our body processes food, we metabolize, we eliminate, we're grounded, we're calm, we can heal, because healing only happens in the rest and digest state, versus fight or flight, right? You've probably heard that, oh, I'm in fight or flight. Not actually the same thing, but that's okay. We'll talk about that too. So basically, until 1994, we basically thought that we had an on switch, a gas pedal, which is the sympathetic or stimulated fight or flight response, where we handle stress by either running towards it, right, which is the fight, or running away from it, which is the flight, or freezing, shutting down and not being able to handle it. But we've subsequently realized that there's actually more than just that on switch and the off switch, being the parasympathetic state, the rest and digest, the soothe and ground, the stay and play. We're more complicated than we thought. You're more complicated than you thought. But fundamentally, what's happening is your body is either searching for, well, it's always searching for signs of safety or threat, because its main function, the main function of your nervous system, is survival, keeping you alive, right? And so this evolved, incredibly intricate system has evolved over millions of years, but innately is the same. It's searching for threats and dangers and risks in your environment, and your external environment and internal environment. So it's constantly scanning. It's kind of like an antenna. It's constantly seeking out information from the environment as well as what's happening inside of you. So not only are you receiving information, but you're also emitting information. This is important. We'll talk about that more later, because it's your vibe, right? Your electromagnetic field, or your vibrational frequency, however you want to say it, you are emitting a signal by way of your nervous system. Again, this is so cool. And this is something that, inside the yoga practice, they've been talking about for thousands of years. And now neuroscience is like, yep, you guys are right. You're pretty amazing. The breath is important, all of this stuff. We're going to get to it, but, plug for yoga because it's amazing. So let's talk about this. So if your nervous system perceives a potential threat in the environment, it goes from being in this nice, regulated, centered, steady state of this level of connection. So this first state of the nervous system is called the ventral vagal state. And this is where you're engaged with people in the environment, you have a nice peaceful expression on your face, you're able to handle challenges and then settle back down, you can relax without collapsing. So this is the baseline state, right? And we operate here. And this is where we tend to hopefully spend most of our time. However, due to chronic stress, not all of us do, but we'll get to that as well. So we want to be able to be in this state, rise to the challenge, and come back and regulate, right? So this is our window of tolerance, or what we can handle that, doesn't fully trigger us and cause us to get dysregulated. But what happens when our brain perceives a threat, either internal or external, either real or imagined, is we get activated. So we go from being regulated to a very activated, dysregulated state. We go into go mode, right? This is where we switch on. The gas pedal goes. basically where what is controlling us and relaxing us and grounding us gets lifted. Think of the brakes on a bicycle, right? So when you squeeze the brakes, everything slows down. So the ventral vagal part of your nervous system, right? Because there's more than just the on-off switch. That's why this is called the polyvagal theory, because there's poly meaning more than one, meaning many. So what happens is the ventral vagal part of our nervous system is like a brake, and it slows everything down. Okay, so we're just riding on our bike and we got the brakes on and we're going at a nice easy pace, and here we go. And then all of a sudden it's like, woo, threat. Say there's a car in front of you. So the brake comes off, right? So the nervous system state shifts, and then all of a sudden we're in go mode. Your heart rate gets elevated, your digestion slows down, your brain activity shifts from being, happy, present, creative, in flow, whatever, to survival mode, right? So a different part of your brain called the amygdala gets activated because it's sensing the threat in your environment, and it kicks us into go mode. So it sends a signal to your adrenal glands. It's like, go, we need adrenaline, we got to take action. Your heart rate starts pounding, your muscles get activated, you start to just get ready to handle the situation. So you are now activated in the sympathetic state. So this is another state of the nervous system, right? So what's happening here is we go into fight or flight. In our next episode, we will talk about flight, where we run from the situation, i.e. get the hell out of there because it's dangerous or whatever it is, right? Today we're talking about fight. So being mobilized, going into action and going right towards the situation, right? So when the situation was, say, a bear, and if you were going to fight it, I don't know why you would, but whatever, we would go towards the predator and prepare for action and engage in whatever fight mechanism. Maybe we had to, I don't know. I don't want to be aggressive towards the bear, but it's a survival situation. Okay, so the body would need to respond to the situation. So what's happening here is that you would diffuse this stress energy by fighting back, right? We would diffuse it by, either, I don't know, maybe you poke the bear in the stomach, you punch, I don't know, whatever you'd have to do to the bear. We would go into go mode, we prepare for action with the predator. But because in our modern life, there's not a predator per se, this survival strategy of fight mode is still activated, but we internalize it. So rather than this outward expression of, I got to fight back, I got to deal with the situation, we default to these survival strategies that are still using this same stress response as a mechanism. We default to these strategies such as the high performer pressure trap, such as perfectionism, control issues, anxiety overdrive. We're going to talk about these individually, but basically, this is your body's way of handling the stress, but instead of externally expressing it, we bring it inwards. We pressurize ourselves and we push ourselves to be able to fight back against the stressor, right? Again, it can be real or imagined, internal, external. Basically, this is your way of handling the stressful situation. Well, how do I know that this is happening? Well, as I go through these different survival strategies, you might recognize yourself in them. Well, how does this get decided? Which one we go to? You might be wondering to yourself. Well, your nervous system was patterned when you were a child, before the age of 7, based on your environment, your upbringing, the environment that you were raised in, the way that your caregivers behaved and handled stress. It's dependent on your constitution, your attachment styles, your personality, the actual situation. All of these factors will impact how you respond in a stress situation. And again, I should say that, of course, there is a caveat here. There are very real survival situations in our modern life. I am not negating that, but I'm just saying that for the most part, our life, thankfully, is not the level of survival requirements that our ancestors had when they were running from the tigers and such. So of course there will be real survival situations where we do go into fight mode. We have to handle the situation, like you have to like break down the door or whatever it is, and we go into action. But in this modern reality that we live in, this fight mode here tends to shift us into this sort of gas pedal go mode where we are running towards the situation and taking action, right? And so because we can't discharge the stress energy, the adrenaline, the cortisol by, fighting back in the situation, all of this chronic stress gets internalized. Chronic stress is a major contributing factor in every major chronic disease. And so the more we can become aware of stress in our life and how it's showing up, and the more we can have real-time practices like power pauses to regulate in real time and bring our stress levels down, the better. Right? Because your nervous system is very responsive, and so it wants to come back to homeostasis. It wants to come back to regulation. But if we are just operating in these protective patterns and these survival strategies, and we're not even aware of it, we're just feeding the stress cycle in our body, right? The adrenaline continues, the cortisol continues, which causes inflammation and heart issues and joint issues and all sorts of things. And so it's really important that we recognize that the threat is typically no longer physical, and it tends to be more emotional, mental, chemical sometimes. But we want to look at how this pressure that we experience in these stressful situations, it's really triggering the same stress response, but we don't have this outlet. We don't have this, diffusion. And so what we do is instead we go into high-performing pressure trap as the first mechanism of fight mode. So let's talk about this one. And you may not go through all of these. I think that we all have these different patterns, and we engage them based on the situation. We engage them based on our personality. You may do some more than others. You may not do you may not do one or two of them at all, but it's just something for you to be aware of, because the more you can be aware of these patterns as an indicator of what's happening internal, as a cue that your nervous system is in a dysregulated state, i.e. you've gone into fight mode, then the more self-awareness that you have, right? Because that's what this really is helping you develop self-awareness of these patterns. And because they are learned behaviors, good news, they are changeable. Much like you update the operating system on your phone, these are changeable because your brain is plastic, right? Neuroplasticity, it's not actually plastic. Neuroplasticity meaning it's changeable, it's malleable. So what happens when we identify as a go person, an action-oriented, a go-getter, a doer, a high achiever, a high performer, the person that really pushes yourself to the max? Then we have the high pressure trap, right? And so this I got to make it happen. I'm going to do it. I want more. I want better. I want faster. And it's this drive that is pushing us forward, and we're going to handle the situation through action, right? And so this actually feeds on itself, because when we accomplish a goal, then we have a release of dopamine, and the brain loves dopamine. So it says, whatever we just did, let's do it again. And so we get into this cycle where we're constantly feeding and we're running on these stress hormones as well as dopamine, and we feel this internalized pressure based on the stress of whatever situation we have going on. And so we want to look at this and recognize that this is an adaptive mechanism, right? This is the mind's way of handling stress. It's not innately good and it's not innately bad. But if we are constantly running this way and we're running on stress and we're in this very dysregulated sympathetic state, we burn out the system a lot faster, the system being your body, right? And we just talked about the effect of stress. So if you notice yourself in that pattern, recognize it and label it, call it out. Oh, this is my mind. This is my mind in this pattern. I do this sometimes. And you might have done it so much that you identify it and you just have it be as part of your personality, right? Some people just identify as being high performers, and it's like a badge of honor in many communities. And that's good, as long as it's used from that place of purpose and power and presence and intentionality, i.e. it's used from a place of regulation in the nervous system. Okay, so that's one of the first fight reactions when we have stress. Again, this isn't necessarily sequential, like you won't necessarily go into this one and that one and this one. I just want to show you these different ways that fight energy shows up, okay, in these behavioral patterns. The second one is perfectionism. So perfectionism is an attempt at controlling the situation, right? If we think that we make it a certain way and we have that level of control, it's a safety mechanism. And when we think that we are controlling it, it's a way of this creating perceived safety, because that's really what your brain and your body want, is safety. So how can we give it safety? We can power pause and we can regulate, but we'll talk about that in a second. So perfectionism, again, is not inherently good or bad. And it has really great things to it, because we want to be attentive to detail. We want to make sure that things are presented in a really high quality, but we also don't want to be obsessive, right? And so that's really interesting, because again, we want to look at how these behaviors are playing out, and were these modeled for you as a child? Like, is this something that your mom or dad did, or is this something you learned from a teacher or whatever? So again, you may or may not engage in these behaviors. I just want you to shed a little light on it. The third one that is the fight response is control. Having difficulty having other people help you, trying to be in charge of the situation, trying to, manage every little detail, being a bit of a control freak, right, as we call it. And so again, this is a way of the body attempting to balance the situation. But usually it's counterproductive, because this control is really an illusion. Like, we really don't have control in every situation. And so it can, again, cause us to be more and more stressed out. And so again, just looking at this from the lens of non-judgmental self-awareness, like, if you notice yourself, if you notice that you have control issues, then again, this is just something for you to be aware of. It's a way that you've been handling stress, right? And so again, might be something that has been so woven into the fabric of who you are because of experiences you had in the past, that some people suggest that these behaviors are even trauma responses because of how you learned to handle a situation before. And then we default to this because it's been patterned so much into your nervous system. So again, these are just things to look at through this lens of curiosity, right? Through this lens of compassionate curiosity. So the fourth mechanism for fight mode is anxiety overdrive. So anxiety overdrive is that very activated state, very stressed state, right? And so this is basically running on the fumes of stress, and it's overfunctioning, overdoing, overgiving, attempting to control the situation or be the leader in the situation, but doing it from this place of being off kilter. It may appear like that you're coming across with that level of confidence and authority and being fully engaged. But the thing is that if it's this more dysregulated way of doing that, it can come across very performative. It's like we're trying to prove something to ourselves, prove something to other people. And it really is, underneath it all, we have this level of exhaustion or overwhelm or maybe even dread or maybe even resentment. But we're powering through, we're pushing through, we're fighting through to get things resolved or get things handled, right? So again, this is interesting because this is both a very activated state in the sympathetic state, but there's elements of connectivity and attempting to engage with others in the situation, because we're attempting to navigate it by handling it, by presenting really well, by taking action, by showing up. And so it's a really interesting state. So this is more of a blended state. So we have aspects of the sympathetic and we have aspects of the parasympathetic, because we're attempting to be social and engage with other people, but it's from this very frantic and frazzled and on the verge of a freak out state of being. So what's happening here is that stress, right? Stress is prevalent in these situations. The body is perceiving a threat. It's realizing that we need to handle the situation. And this is a reality, right? This is a stress response. This is the way that we are handling it. It's not necessarily beneficial. It's probably a little bit maladaptive, but it's an adaptive behavior that you've learned. This is something that you've practiced for a while and you're just dealing with it, right? And so the interesting thing is that, women are more likely than men to internalize stress. And we are more likely to engage in these behaviors because we are considered the caregivers. We are shown to be, and we want to be able to balance all these things. I can handle it. I can do it. And so when we have this stress in our life and we default to one of these modes, this can cause us to be in that chronic stress cycle more and more and more. And 75% of adults, according to the American Psychological Association, experience stress or have experienced either physical signs of stress or psychological signs of stress in the last year. And it's really common, right? It's very common. And, some stress is good, but when we have chronic, exhaustive levels of stress, and if we stay in these survival strategies and we stay running on stress, then it's exhausting to us. And it's not necessarily making use of all of the incredible gifts and talents and amazing parts of your being that you have. And so what we want to remember is when we're observing these patterns, these strategies that we default to, just because they are wired into your neurology, into your nervous system, because they were, again, learned when you were a little child. They're operating at the level that you may not even be aware of until now. And so we want to witness these parts of yourself, because what they are parts of you, right? It's a part of your journey where you learned how to do things this way, and you default back to that because maybe it worked in the past. And so rather than trying to, eradicate this behavior or make it wrong in any sort of way, we want to turn towards that part of yourself, because think about it. This is a survival strategy. This is a self-protective mechanism. It's attempting to do what it's supposed to do. So it's not negative. It's not bad. But what can happen because of it is if we are listening to it and we're following through and we're just doing these behaviors because they are wired in and we don't even realize, we're just feeding that cycle and we're fortifying that pattern, right? It's like you're training yourself to do it this way because it worked okay in the past, and maybe you haven't been shown more effective ways of reducing your stress and being able to operate at the level of regulation just yet, which is what power pauses do. So you just default to this as your stress reaction. And so sometimes we do it so much we think it's part of who we are and we think it's part of our personality. But what we want to recognize is that it's a pattern, it's a way of living that you have practiced for a while, and that's okay. And we want to look at it and we want to turn towards it with a sense of appreciation. What? Why? It's doing something that's exhausting me and it's causing me to burn myself out or whatever. Well, it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's protecting you. It's helping you handle this situation. So we want to look at it with a sense of acceptance and love, because what it's showing you is that you are in a contracted state. You are in a protective, contractive state. So it's showing you that you're dysregulated. And you may not recognize it because you've been doing it for so long that you think that's just the way that it is. But what we want to do is recognize that this pattern, this way of doing things, way of handling stress, it's not necessarily conducive to evolving and expanding and getting to the place where you are achieving your goals with ease, where you have sustainable success, where you have that level of continued energy and clarity and focus, because that's what comes when we're in a regulated state. We can rest without collapsing, but we can rise to the challenge without overexerting ourselves or going into that spiral. That's where we want to come back to. And that is that state of regulation in the nervous system. So when we notice that we're engaging in this old, outdated pattern, we label it, the mind. Oh, there's my mind again, trying to protect me. Some people like to make up funny names for their mind and just call it like whatever, the Squawking Seagull Collective or the Shitty Committee in your head. Or, some people call these patterns of self-sabotage. I don't necessarily agree, because I think it's a pattern of self-protection. So, some people name these different characters, whatever. You can do that, right? You can do that. Just label it. Oh, there's my mind. Oh, there's my mind. And that's what it is your mind is attempting to protect you. So we label it, And then when we recognize that, and when you are bringing that level of consciousness to it, is that you're shifting from the state of the fear center in the brain, your amygdala, and it's automatically bringing back online your prefrontal cortex, which is your higher mind, the creativity, the CEO of the brain, where we can process emotions more consistently and more effectively. So we want to label it, right? And you can, now that you know, oh, I'm in fight mode, I'm in fight mode, I'm in go mode here. So we're in go mode, right? We want to come back to flow mode. We're going to get to no mode later, but we're talking about go mode now. So I'm in go mode right now, but you don't have the fuel to sustain that pace. And it's not the effective use of your talents and gifts and skills. It's just not, right? Despite what your mind says, and we get so conditioned to running and operating this way, is that we forget that within you is an innate wisdom that will guide you towards your next step. And this is the wisdom of the prefrontal cortex, or your intuition, your soul, however you want to say it. But what we're doing here is bringing you back into that regulated state where you have the availability of more information because you can perceive it. When you're in a survival state, you're under stress, you don't even see all of these other opportunities that are around you. We don't see these other options because you're just about survival. So first we want to label it. There's my mind doing its thing again. And then I want you to drop into your body. So this is the power pause method. So we want to label it. And we want to feel the feels. So I want you to label the feeling that you're experiencing. Ooh, I'm feeling very overwhelmed right now. I'm feeling very pressurized. I'm feeling tight. And so we label it and we give it that sense of acknowledgement. Because what we're doing here is, remember, this stress energy has been very active in your system and your body's just trying to handle it and trying to fight back from the situation. So we want to be able to give an opportunity to express some of that stress energy out of your body and metabolize the stress, meaning process it or move it through, right? So first thing, we want to feel the feels, we want to label it, right? So then we're already shifting gears, you've brought everything back into that level of awareness and consciousness and presence. So we feel the feels, and then we take a power pause. So we want to give an opportunity to ground into your body. We want to give an opportunity to support your body so that you can come into a state of regulation. So you can use a tool, you can use a resource. So usually we use something in the body. Maybe, you could use your breath. Since you're in fight mode and you tend to have a little bit more of that very activated go forward momentum, you may need something that's a little bit more active. I do find that when you're in that fight mode, you need something that's a little more active to down-regulate you. So for example, you could do some sort of like running on the spot or stamping your feet on the ground and pounding your feet into the ground. If you feel that, you can do that in the situation that you're in, you might use your breath in a really intentionally letting it out, expressive sort of way. So that's how you can take the power pause. And then, so we feel the feels, we take the power pause. And then when you feel the shift, right, when we go from go mode to flow mode, you'll feel yourself, everything is settling, grounding, becoming a little bit more present. Then from that place of power, from that place of center within yourself, you get to decide how you're going to go back into the situation. And that is your place of power. That is being able to show up on purpose. And that is really the true magic of the power pause, is reminding you that you are a purposeful powerhouse. You get to decide. You get to live and move and breathe and show up on purpose. And that is so powerful. So you decide how you're going to go back into the day. Do you want to be centered? Do you want to be focused? Do you want to be happy? Whatever it is, right? Some people struggle to decide on that in the moment. So sometimes in the power pause movement, we go deeper into this so you know who you are, right? You know who you are at the deepest level of how you want to show up and how you want to feel. So you know that. You already have that information. You're like, you finish your power pause and then you say to yourself, from that activated, grounded, centered state, I'm a purposeful powerhouse. I can do this. And so you are activating, you're anchoring, you're deciding, you're intentionally calibrating to that. And now you're back in the flow state. Okay? So this is part one of the series. This was fight mode. So part 2, we're going to go into flight mode. Flight, like airplanes go into flight. And when we are activated, we're mobilized, but we go away from the situation. Okay, so make sure to tune in. This episode will be dropping next week. And I really hope that this was insightful for you, because when you know about your nervous system, when you know about how your body is attempting to just deal with, the challenges of life, the stressors of life, and you have this level of awareness of the way that you're showing up and these patterns that maybe we're operating at below the level of your awareness before, so subconsciously, when you can just shed a little light on it, it gives you that sense of, wow, this is really amazing. This is who you are, right? Your body's just trying to make it through. It's just trying to survive. And so looking at these survival strategies from a different perspective, I think hopefully will give you some more clarity, because it's really quite fascinating how we've evolved, right? And so the most evolved part of our nervous system is that ventral vagal state. And so that we want to go from being able to recognize these patterns to coming back into that regulated state, so you can be present. You can engage in the situation. You can handle the situation, right? Which is that fight energy is handling the situation, but from a much more controlled and intentional state. And that's really what we're looking for, right? That's really what we're looking for. And that's truly living from your leadership energy and staying in that very, staying in your lane, if you will, like staying in that place of presence and power and purpose. So I hope that this was really helpful for you. I would love to connect with you further on this. And so if you are a leader who is leading teams and you're seeing these signs of stress in your team members, and you're noticing maybe some of these behaviors in them or in yourself, I would love to connect further. So I have a free burnout risk and resilience quiz that you can take. It's going to be linked up in the show notes, and you can take that and give you some insight onto where you or your team are, and be able to help you to foster more resilience, right? Be able to be in the flow zone and be able to go into the go zone and then come back, right? And that's really what resilience is your ability to have this flexible adaptability to life's challenges. So I hope this was insightful. Make sure to tune in for episode 2. Next week, we're talking about flight mode. And I bet you can guess what those are. Maybe you can guess, maybe you can't, but I'm not going to tell you anymore. I hope you have an amazing day and take good care. Bye-bye.